Wiring a model railway could be a daunting task, so let me show you how I've done it at Chadwick. Hi, welcome back to Chadwick Model Railway. I'm Charlie. So what's this video about? Well, it's actually in response to many people who have asked to know a bit of more background info on the electrical wiring that sits behind Chadwick Model Railway. So what's the layout really about? Well, there are sort of two major districts, and there's also something called train controller, which is a system of automation that make my sort of trains run around. Now, to take that a sort of stage further, what's the first thing that I need to consider was, well, obviously it's the purchase of a system. Now, many years ago, I knelt at the altar of a company called Digitrax based in Florida in the States, and I invested in one of their systems because I was influenced by David Townend's McKinley team, and that's how that sort of system grew. Would I recommend Digitrax to you? Well, probably not, because you're not going to be dedicated to train controller, let's say. So it's a very difficult situation to recommend a system. There's loads of great stuff out there, like the Z21 Black is a wonderful idea. But if you need to invest in a system, you need to go to model railway clubs or model railway shows and ask everyone, you know, what are the sort of the drawbacks and the advantages of one system over another? Is the repair time, you know, acceptable? Is it overly expensive? You know, are these bits available? Are they guaranteed? So these are the things you need to think about, along with how big your layout's going to be, how much power you need to draw, and how it's going to grow. Right, enough of all that blah. So let's take a little look at Chadwick. Now, powering the layout on and off, I tend to use these type of radio remotes. So if I turn on C, which is actually two computer feeds. If I turn on number one, which is this little ramshackle drawer that I kind of built, which controls the main components for this end of the layout. I can turn on the other aspects of the layout, as you can see them coming up on all the various power districts, and you can hear bits and bobs sort of tuning in and let you know that they're coming online. But let's have a closer look first into this little box. So in here we have the main controller, which is a DCS 240. This is the sort of main brains behind it, and Digitrax works on a data transfer system known as LocoNet, and here you can see the LocoNet cables. And all the items on the layout are made by Digitrax or an equivalent type of company are connected via these LocoNet cables, so they all kind of come in on this data bus and speak to each other and allow decent automation to take place. Now, power goes into this, and then the feeds come out. This one's going up to the controllers. This one with the red tag goes to a separate power district right over the other side, and the other cables now loop around here. Now, this thing here is known as a PM42, and this has 4 power districts, and here you can see them 1, 2, 3 and 4, and it's the Helix is on one power district, the fiddle yard on another, sorry, this end of the fiddle yard is on another, and then you have the inner and outer circuits on the top board. Now, the advantages on that is that if I get some kind of a derailment in the Helix or something, then these other power districts do not shut down. So that way, the only bit that shuts down is where you have to go fault finding. So if I have a derailment on the inner loop up top, the Helix and everything else will keep running. So when you know that the inner on its own has stopped, that's naturally where the fault will lie. I've always used these type of terminal blocks in recent years. I used to do soldering using the dreadful tag strips, but they are, as I said, dreadful. My computer talks to this one, and I've also got something called LocoNet Checker, which talks to this item here, which is a PR4, which enables another computer screen. Right, that's the complexity of it. Now let's just talk a little bit about cable sizes. So the main power lines in and out of here are the equivalent of 3202. All my droppers are 1602, and then the lighting circuits are 702. Now let's just talk a little bit more about those cable sizes. Now, as far as I can figure out, there are 4 ways, or at least 4 ways, of measuring sort of cable size. There is its cross-sectional area. There is the AWG, which is the American wire gauge, though it's not just used in America. There is the quantity and size of the strands within the cable, and there's also the power rating, such as 5 amps, and it might just be stamped on it. Okay, now there is a guy around by the name of Steve Lane who has a website called Railway Scenics. I really do suggest that you go to this website. There's nothing in it for me. If you want to buy from him or just go there for the information, then fine. But here is a good look into his website with all the sort of information that he provides for free, and of course his cable prices and all the electrical components that he can provide. So here we are at the Railway Scenics homepage, and please don't lose sight of these tabs across the top, because the info and help ones is most useful. So when we scroll down the page, ordinary sort of layout of a website, and he does lots of stuff and all the rest of it. Right, let's get into the bits we're interested in, which is about the electrical stuff. Right, so here's all his electrical stuff, and as you can see, he sells a fair old bit of stock there, cables, heat shrink and all this sort of stuff. Lovely. Right, information center, all about him, the links, their products, blah blah blah. But it gets into the finer details of wiring. Now when you come into this one, layout and electrical wire details, now you get down into the nitty gritty of it all. Now I'm not going to read all this, but I do suggest you come here and have a look. It will give you a great insight. And then this is wonderful, Rail Scenics Beginner's Guide on DCC Bus Wiring. Now if you're a DC, don't run off at this stage, but this is brilliant. And there's a little section here, the caution section, emphasising that don't get stuck into something which could turn a bit on the dangerous side and all the rest of it. And he goes into wire sizes and all this sort of stuff. Lovely, really is good meaty information. Now I mentioned earlier about the differences in cable size. So the American wire gauge, millimetre of cross section, and then the UK wire sizes over here. And for an example, if we take 1602, it's also known as 20 AWG, and it's 0.5 millimetre cross sectional area. So let's go into wire sizes that we use. Now you may have come across 702. It means there are 7 strands of 0.02 millimetre wire within the insulation. It's rated at 1.4 amps, all quite straightforward. And the same for 1602 and 2402 and 3202. We'll go back to 16, and as you can see, this one is now rated at 3 amps. 2402 is 4.5 amps, and 3202 is 6 amps. Absolutely brilliant basic information on this gentleman's website. And of course you can go to electrical and you can buy the wire from here and all this sort of stuff. It guides you through it. It's all straightforward. Right. Also, yeah, we'll touch on reels. So let's take a price then. 1602, 100 metre reel, 17 quid. Well, depending on the colour. Is it? Oh, it's all the same price. Right. So a 100 metre reel of 1602, £17.64, and I'm sure there'll be a bit of P&P on top of that. And Steve also sells suitcase connectors, which you sort of crimp into place, and I must confess I would avoid them like the plague. I really don't believe that they are as robust and reliable as you might hope. Great website, please clock this one. So we've ascertained that we need 1602 as an ideal dropper size from our track down to our bus wire. And our bus wire might either be something like a 2402 or a 3202. So where do we go from there? Now we could use something like the wretched solder strips rather than a decent terminal block. But why don't we just connect the two together? Because once we've stripped our cable back with our nifty wire strippers and we are ready to solder, we get our piece of 2402 or 3202 cable, and with this nifty pair of DCC Concepts wire strippers, what it can do is actually strip back the cable in the middle, so we're not having to solder the cable together. So now all we need to do is solder these two together and then add a little bit of tape to keep them isolated. Now hopefully that all makes sense with the cable sizes. And if you have any difficulties, please give Steve a ring, because his number's on the website. He'll be more than happy to help. Lovely. Now I'll talk about my main power controller. I believe this one's rated at 8 amps, but 5 amps is the maximum the average sort of person wants anyway. I just tend to have a problem with over-engineering. As you're probably aware, a bit of OCD, I imagine. Now, cable sizes. So coming from the DCS 240 up to the DCC Concepts Alpha meter, it's 3202, and then going back down to the PM42 again is 3202, so main cables. And then from the PM42 out to the 4 districts, again it's 3202, and then from the districts outwards it's then down to 2402. So it all sort of makes sense as the cables sizes go down, because the current draw is less. So it all sort of hopefully makes sense. But the main thing is, of course, that you understand your system and you design sort of spare capacity into it. So if you want to make it bigger or more powerful, you can do. If you want to put more locos and sound locos and all these kind of functions, clearly you need spare capacity to move into. Now I did mention about power districts, but there are 2 main areas, sort of 2 booster areas. So this is the main area with the PM42, and then across the other side of the layout there is another booster with its own PM42. So the layout is actually in 2 halves, and then each of those 2 halves have 4 power districts, is the way it works. So now let's have a look in the station area with a couple of trains and see what all these devices actually bring to the show. Now here we have a high mech on the outer power district and a parcels wagon on the inner circuit. Now if I was to start up this parcel service and I short out the tracks, naturally it will stop. If I short out the track next to it, it will obviously stop. However, if I short out the other tracks, it doesn't stop because it's in a separate power district. And then similarly, if I just bring that one back, the high mech is exactly the same. Yes, it will short out, and no, it won't short out. Lovely. So hopefully you can see the advantage of having separate power districts. But of course, there are other things to consider, such as how you wire up your points. So let's have a look at that. Now this time we have our high mech coming out of platform 3 of the main station, and we've set the point against it. And as you'd expect, when it hits the frog, naturally it will stop. Because it causes a short. Now what are we supposed to do? Now this could be anywhere on a layout, and you're going to have to forcibly pull the train back to clear it. But of course, as soon as you do that, it runs forward and causes the short again. So what are you supposed to do? Well, you've got to go back to your controller and turn it off, then change the point, and then hopefully it goes on. Now, if you wire your point motors so they are not connected to the DCC bus, you just need to change the point. So in my case, this point is number 423. No, I haven't got 423 points. All of my points are now going to start with a 4. So I need to change point 423. So 423, and I want to throw it. And surprise, surprise, off my high mech goes. Simple. But it's all in the planning. Now you may be aware that I use these shorting links, but where did I get them from? Well, I simply made them out of 2 old pennies soldered together. an idea that I got from David Townend down at McKinley and his team of faithful followers. So how do you make them? Well, I bought them from a car boot sale and I got 10 old pennies for £1. But this is what I did with them. Now, using some plumber's regular flux, all I do is poke a bit of this on one side and then on the other coin. Now, to avoid serious burns, we need a nice pair of mole grips, and I've snipped off a piece of proper plumber's solder to go on the top of there. Lovely. And then all I need to do is to flash up the glow lamp, avoiding at all costs the burns unit. And then a case of holding it still while the solder hardens. And there we have it. Beautiful. And as you can see, I clearly got carried away. But the great thing about these is you can sort of pre-position them at key areas. So, one down by each helix, by each part of the fiddle yard, by more complex point work. So if you do get a derailment, you can instantly slap it on the track and limit any damage. And by putting it on the track, if a coach derails, you can't sort of drag hold of it and trying to put it along as the train's going along. Just stop the train, fix it, take it off, carry on. So there we go, easy. Next time you go to a car boot sale, have a look around for some old pennies and knock some of these up. Now, whilst I remember, some folks were asking where I bought these retaining walls from. Well, they were from Sherwood Models Online. And as you can see here, they're £7.99 per sheet, and they're currently out of stock, probably because I bought so many. But there we go. But they're a strange commodity, sort of like a polystyrene feel to them, and quite difficult to paint the render in. But anyway, that's where I got them from. Right, what other bits have I got on the layout to show you? Now, I mentioned in the last video that I was thinking of putting together a video of mistakes that both you and I have made in our sort of modelling careers, as it were. I know I've bought things and thought to myself, what on earth I wasted money on this for? And I'd asked for people to send in video clips of the mistakes they've made. Now, if you've got a clip you could send me, please do it in a landscape format rather than a vertical. I've already received a few clips, so your input would be very much appreciated. So if you could send it to chadwickmodelrailway@gmail.com, please include your name, and obviously if it makes the cut, as it were, I'll try and make a video of everyone's favourite mistakes. Lovely. Now, I try to locate the items that do the controlling reasonably close to the relevant bits and bobs. So now here we have 4 DS64s, and these control 16 points, and the points are all on the board above in the TMD. And here are 2 BDL168s. These things work with block detection, and again they are close to the blocks in which they refer. Now, rather than keep all this stuff in one central area, I find it much easier to put it close to the items concerned, and it certainly cuts down on the wiring. Of course, with my obsessive behaviour, here you can see that I've labelled up all the point motors and all the blocks for the block detection. So everything is labelled so I can see if there's an issue of where to sort of chase the fault back to. But it's all in the planning. Here's the LocoNet loop that goes across all the items so that the controller can see what's going on in every single component throughout the layout. So DS64s are used to control most of the points, and the BDR168 to monitor the block detection system. Now, another board, again located near its sort of items. Here's another with another BDR168. Here are its blocks, and here are the feeds. This is a DAC22. This controls 8 point motors. Now, my point motors here, they're labelled up, as you can see, 424, 423, 422, and the colours of all my point motor power supplies are always blue and yellow. But this one here monitors the feedback, so it tells LocoNet what position the points are in. So if it throws the point or gets a signal to throw the point, yes, it throws it, but it also has a feedback saying, yes, I've been thrown and I'm now in the thrown or the closed position. And those cables come in pink and sort of purple. Lovely. There are the odd ground wire coming around, or an earth as we would call it, and naturally that's yellow and green as we would do with UK wiring. And then finally this board here is a SIG M20, and this deals with the signalling on the layout. Now this one here is Chadwick 34, well 30 and Chadwick 32, and those 3 signals are actually this one here that goes by the station. So these 3 are naturally wired up in red, yellow and green, so it makes it straightforward, makes common sense for the wiring. And here we come in on the LocoNet data feed so that the controllers know exactly what's going on with all the sort of peripheral items around the layout. But the SIG M20 listens for the positions of the points and also monitors the positions of which blocks are occupied, and therefore, because it knows what's going on, it can then get the signals to display the correct colours for, let's say, an incoming train. Or if the point is thrown against it, it will turn it red. Or in 2 blocks time, if it's occupied, again it will turn it yellow and then to red as the train goes along the blocks to make sure we have safety. I must confess I only have bad crashes when I'm working outside of train controller, where these things then don't have any real effect. Now I imagine the final thing we're talking about is train controller. Now I'm not necessarily recommending this to anybody. iTrain is a very good system for controlling trains, but this one suits me and I've obviously committed to it, and it's expensive. Now if we take a closer look at this screen on the left, this is one that monitors the LocoNet system. And if I turn on track power, the system appears to go mad as all the components right around the layout report in. Now I did mention that the last things to report in would be the SIG M20s, the items that control the signals throughout the layout, and only once that everything else has reported in and LocoNet goes quiet, in comes the SIG M20 information and all the signals are set into the correct aspects to show which blocks are occupied and which points are thrown or closed, etc. Now looking at the window to the right hand side of the main screen, this is the screen that contains 6 throttles on the left hand side, and you can select any throttle you want for any loco you own, and then your loco list is to the right of that. And now going to the main train controller page, we can see the fiddle yard schematic. You can see where the trains are located, they're in pink, and the blocks that are empty are in green. And here are the 2 Helix there's the downside, and then there's the upside, and obviously both the helix are currently empty. Now if I switch this view over to the scenic level, this is the upper side, and we have the TMD area in here. Then here are A and B coming up and down from Helix 2, and they'll run in through the station to platform 2, and something I call blue 3. There's platform 3, and then it runs off back down to Helix 1 or over into the branch line station. Similarly, you can come up Helix 1, through Red 1, through Red 2, and then straight through these lines, or go into platform 1 and then back down the helix, or indeed you can actually go right around the outside of the TMD through a reverse loop, and there's a couple of hidden sidings here that are underneath the freight yard. And then finally switching to the freight yard itself, and there's Revel's freight yard. And again, this is a manual operations area. Trains will come into amber 2, stop in amber 1, and then the operator then would take off the loco into amber 13, back into amber 7, park it up in amber 6, dismantle the train, rebuild a train, and then perhaps send the new train off over to the branch line goods area. And that's the sort of guts of how train controller works. So all I should do now is fire off a couple of trains just so you can see how the trains operate, just purely looking at train controller. So here we are in the schedules view, and as you can see, hop AB, when I press start, after a while it will actually automatically start up the Pullman train. So let's fire off the HST as well, so we'll get those two going straight away, and then switch the view back to the main fiddle yard. Now as you can see, the yellow lines are the routes that train controller has reserved for these trains, and we have the HST is going to go down the right hand side as it turns pink, and the class 47 pulling the hopper wagons is going down through the wheel cleaner, and you can see the yellow lines as they progress around. Now it's worth mentioning at this point that when a train leaves a block, the block remains occupied, i.e. pink, for 7 seconds, and that's just to avoid any confusion between other incoming trains, so we don't get a bit of a prang. And now we can see the HST is heading to the lower level of Helix 1, and you can see on the diagram that Helix 1, the lower level, is now occupied. The hopper train has now triggered off the Pullman, so the Pullman now makes its way across the fiddle yard, heading down towards the wheel cleaner. Meanwhile, the HST is now working its way up Helix 1, and similarly the class 47 is making its way up Helix 2. The class 47 is then joined on Helix 2 with the Pullman coming up onto the first level. Lovely. And you can see the way train controller makes sure that sort of everything remains separate. No trains can crash into other trains because the routes will be blocked. It's all rather sensible. And now we go up to the upper level now, and we await the arrival of these trains. And the HST is now coming up out of the helix and going across the viaduct, and it will turn in and come across the station. And whipping through the station there, sadly I've got a bit of work to do on the levels there, but we'll come to that later. Makes its way straight through the station. Meanwhile, the class 47 with the hop AB train has now come out of Helix 2, makes its way up into the fast up line where we want it to stop in front of our signal gantry. All being well, and faced with a red light, it does. Now, with that train parked there, this will allow the Pullman to come up of Helix 2 and then go into platform 2 and obviously take on more passengers and drop people off, whilst not being held up by the much slower hopper train. So in comes our Pullman train, and similarly is faced with a red light, and will pull up, and as I said, on platform 2. Lovely. Now you build into Train Controller these periods of the waiting time. So the waiting time then expires and the Pullman gets a green light, its route is set, the points change, and it heads slowly out of the station. The light turns red when it enters the following block, and then it heads across the viaduct and then down towards Helix One. This obviously then frees up the blocks in front of the Class 47, and when the initial block is free it turns into a yellow, and when the block after that is free it turns green, and our train will undoubtedly head off. It's worth mentioning, meanwhile, the HST is now safely back down Helix 2 and has gone back into the fiddle yard. So again, over comes across the viaduct comes our 47 with our Hop AB, later to be recategorised HAAs. And then joins the Pullman as they both descend onto Helix 2, Helix One. And then you can see them there heading down on the diagram with the pink blocks. So what's Train Controller like to use? Well, I think like most things it's always a challenge to set up. These things are very sort of intensive, but there are some great Facebook pages out there to draw information from experts, and there are some people out there across the planet really. There's people in Germany, Holland, Australia in particular, who are experts at this, and they really do help people out, especially me when I get problems. So you're not kind of left on your own all the time. There's a great deal of expertise out there if of course you're willing to ask and show that you're not as what should we say, not as sharp as you might hope you are. So finally our Hop AB train makes its way to the final level of the Helix, and then we'll head off into its siding, as you can see now with the yellow route. There we are, nice little shot of it coming out of the Helix, and this one goes into the third siding. Unfortunately the train is still intact. Marvellous. And then Train Controller will eventually tell the train to come to rest, and there's a yellow marker there in front of the tracks, and that marks the next block, so it triggers the Class 47 when it draws current from this next section to stop. Beautiful. Well, I do hope that you found those couple of sequences interesting, and all you do is you get all these ideas in your head and you sort of write schedules, so one train will trigger another, or various sequences, and then you can put together sort of an hour's worth of train movements, and whilst that's going on you can do some shunting, or just a little bit of scenery and all the rest of it that goes with the fun of having a model railway. But that's where I see sort of Chadwick progressing to, so that I can do one thing while the layout's doing another, or I can have friends over, we'll play trains in other areas whilst the scenic trains come around and do their stuff. And as you can see, I put the priority on the Pullman over the hopper train. So the hopper train stops, the Pullman comes in, drops and collects its passengers, goes off, and then the hopper train moves off. And all these sort of sequences make for a more realistic model railway, if of course you've got the time and energy to put into it. So there we are. Hopefully you found it interesting. Now, as usual, if you're not a subscriber, I'd like you to hit the button, if that's at all possible, to help the channel grow. And of course, I'd like to thank my patrons. You make it all possible. I am so, so grateful. Thank you very much indeed. And for you, there's a video here and here, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.